Clan Rampagers, sort of like your more mid-range Naya deck. It looks pretty sweet. I'm not sure how it's going to fare up against Brian.
We've actually seen this matchup before a little earlier. It was, closer to the list that won the Open last week rather than the Thundermine Hellkites. But really, it's just like a slightly bigger aggressive deck. It's still playing, the very large creatures that are pretty undercosted, let's be honest. But you're not playing the Burning Tree Emissary. It's just every single one of your cards is super high impact.
Yeah, a couple cards from Andrew's deck. He actually has a pair of Mizium Mortars, which on Overload could really destroy Brian, since he is focused on things like Lingering Souls. And, even if his Varels is able to survive it, it does get tapped from the Regenerate, and so that could lead to a gigantic Alpha Strike. But let's go ahead and get started here with the action. Looks like Andrew, no 1-drop, but just starts off with a Flint Hoof Boar, no haste.
And from the experience of watching a similar matchup earlier on, I have to say that if Andrew Jessup wants to win, he's got to be the beatdown. He has to be the aggressor in this matchup.
Yeah, you always need to be attacking. You never want to sandbag anything. Clan Rampager is going to get his beats in eventually. Sometimes it's even not a bad play. Like, let's say you have an Alpha Strike the next turn, to potentially just use it as a Flame Rift and dome your opponent for 4. Because, if Brian untaps and has Tragic Slip at the ready, it basically turned off your future Clan Rampager activations.
Exactly.
A lot of cool stuff coming from Brian's deck. We have a Skurzag High Priest, which wasn't in a lot of the lists that have been on Magic Online lately. He cut down on Young Wolf down to just 2. Has the 4 Doom Traveler to go along with Voice of Resurgence as your creatures that you would love to sacrifice. Voral's the Scar Striped, Cartel Aristocrat, Blood Artist, filling out the creatures with Sorin, Lord of Innistrad at the top of the curve. So, looks like we got a Lingering Souls here from BBD. Boris Reckoner from Andrew, really putting some pressure on Brian, but it looks like Brian can, stifle the bleeding here a little bit, putting the Cartel Aristocrat in front of the Flint Hoof Boar, putting a Spirit token in front of Boris Reckoner, and then sacrificing the Spirit before damage, giving protection from green to the Cartel Aristocrat and negating all of the attack.
The entire attack, including the Reckoner
token.
Yeah, including the Reckoner redirect, just doesn't happen. The Spirit's already dead. We've actually seen that interaction quite a few times today.
Right.
The Sacrifice Outlet versus Reckoner matchup is quite favorable.
Yeah, I actually watched Brad Nelson earlier lose on camera in Game 3 because he did not have a second black source, so that you could play something like a Cartel Aristocrat and hold up for Tragic Slip. Here it looks like BBD's mana is perfect. He's got 2 or more of all of his colors, really just flowing very nicely. He did have to take 2 damage from his Temple Garden to cast the Lingering Souls, but
having that a turn earlier definitely makes up for that.
Right.
He's gonna, save more life that way anyway.
Yeah. And an interesting play here, and Andrew only attacks with 1 Boris Reckoner. Something Brian could have done would be put Cartel Aristocrat and a Spirit token in front of the Flint Hoof Boar, and a Spirit in front of the other Boris Reckoner, and then sacrificing it before damage to give protection and kill the Flint Hoof Boar for the cost of just 1 Spirit token.
Right.
So half the Lingering Souls, preventing 6 damage and killing a Boris Reckoner, killing a Flint Hoof Boar. Andrew really didn't want to make that trade.
Yeah, it does not seem very profitable, so sure enough, he just keeps developing his board. Especially with that Gavany Township, you want to preserve your creature count as much as possible.
Yeah, definitely. Any Thundermaw Hellkite here from Andrew could spell disaster for Brian.
Ooh, that is the big addition to this version that isn't in some of these other builds of this Burning Tree Emissary list Naya deck that seems to be taking over all of the top tables. The Thundermaw Hellkite is really the big topper, and not only is it just a giant 5/5 hasty clock, but straight up answering Lingering Souls very cleanly and taking out all of those blockers that BBD might be relying on could be, the key to the Alpha Strike that finishes him off.
Yeah. Brian really going deep into the tank as he is wont to do. Looks like he does have a land for the turn, but really trying to figure out if he wants to main phase in a Orzhov Charm, or potentially cast a Blood Artist first, shocking himself, or maybe even just playing the Sword Lord of Innistrad in his hand. So definitely a lot of avenues he could take. All of them probably pretty bad against Thundermaw Hellkite.
Yeah.
If he plays Sorin, Thundermaw Hellkite just destroys him. But the shock here, putting him down to 10.
It's looking. Looks like he's gonna do 2 things.
Looks like Blood Artist plus Orzhov Charm. And it's possible he doesn't want to use the charm now. Just wait for the Thundermaw. This will let him drain Andrew a little bit with his Blood Artist should, the spirits die. But he's got to be really careful here because that Township, could potentially do him an extra damage if he, waits too long to Orzhov Charm. But I think he's good enough to put it on the stack first.
Yeah. It looks like he was actually considering flashing back Lingering Souls for a second there, but chooses not to. Obviously, the Orzhov Charm, he's got to deal with the Reckoner at some point, or any potential Thundermaw Hellkites that might be coming at him. And
so he does have a lot of things to think about. He has a lot of different options of things he could do. And really, he's trying to play around Thundermaw as much as possible by not flashing back that Lingering Souls. And, he's playing heavily on defense because he knows at any point a Thundermaw Hellkite could just end the game if he decides to get aggressive, maybe with, like, Cartel Aristocrat.
And speak of the devil, or rather the dragon.
Yeah. Old Dargan.
The trigger goes on, and bye-bye spirits.
Yeah, so he is going to stifle a little bit of this attack with the protection on Cartel Aristocrat as well as the Orzhov Charm to kill the dragon, but the
life loss from or life gain from the Blood Artist.
Yeah, but the Orzhov Charm does deal him 5 damage if he decides to kill the dragon here, so it's not an irrelevant amount.
Yeah, he's definitely supposed to be the control in this matchup, but it just looks like the way that these draws have developed that he's way far behind and is going to have to pull out a pretty powerful sequence to catch back up.
Yeah, Thundermaw Hellkite particularly devastating against any sort of Lingering Soul stack, as you can see here. Even though Brian has a removal spell, he not only lost his 2 tokens, but he basically wasn't able to flash back the other half of it in his yard since, they were ultimately going to die to the triggered ability from Thundermaw.
All sorts of value, seen and hidden, and now it looks like Braun Duin forced to Orzhov Charm, the Thundermaw, and honestly, at any point, a second Thundermaw is just game over no matter what Brian does. Yeah. So he's going quite low here, getting the free block from the Aristocrat, taking 3 from the Reckoner.
Yeah, I think he should go up to 13 from the Blood Artist, and then taking 5 from the Orzhov Charm, and then blocking the Flinthoof Boar, and then taking 3 from the Reckoner. So lots of
maybe 5.
Yeah, I don't know.
That'd be my guess. All right, sure enough, 5.
How lucky.
Yeah, how convenient.
Yeah. So it looks like he drew another land.
He's got a Sorin in hand and a Lingering Souls in the yard. Not enough mana to do both.
Yeah, he can still, as long as Andrew doesn't have another big trump in a dragon here, a Sorin can stall the ground for a while, along with the Cartel Aristocrat. He gets a Vampire, runs the whole chump block plus block the Flinthoof Boar with the Cartel.
Gets the drain off of the Blood Artist. Yeah, that theoretically is enough to stabilize, but Andrew Jessup holding 3 cards in hand, didn't play his land last turn, I believe, which means that they are likely all spells, not to mention the Township on board. It's so much pressure.
Yeah, and it's going to take a lot for BB to get out of this, and I think he definitely needs to draw a spell there that could interact favorably with Andrew, because now, as you said, Andrew does just have basically 3 spells in hand guaranteed, and they could be anything. Yeah. They could even be a boat.
Even a Jungle Weaver.
Well, he might cycle that and then draw a good card.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So the attacks here looking pretty like mediocre right now as it stands.
Yeah.
Thanks to that Aristocrat plus Chump sequence, but any sort of like Rampager just absolutely is game over. I would have to assume if he had, an obvious lethal move, he would have done something by now. But he's definitely mulling over his options. Probably got a couple creatures. Not sure the best way to sequence his threats. And Braun Duin just kind of has to hope to draw some cards that actually do something in this matchup.
Yeah. This is like one of the most awful spots for you to be in as a player, where you're just unsure of what to do. Like, you have like something you can do, but if your opponent has X card or, multiple cards that interact unfavorably for you, and, you just have to pray that they don't have it. Yeah. And you always just get that tied up knot sensation in your stomach, and you're like sweating a little bit.
You're like having to play it out, but like you're 10% or whatever to win, but you just have to hope that he's on nothing.
Yeah.
and he's actually going Dominaid, Reckoner, Fight, Lifelinker, Vampire. Is that better than just offing the Blood Artist?
I'm not sure, actually. You know, it's like one... I mean, that's interesting because, you know, the one lifelink from the Vampire might actually end up mattering if he gets to block with it. You know, assuming that he doesn't just throw it under the bus. That is Boris Reckoner.
I would assume it would just be, you know, chumping and then sacrificing to the Aristocrat anyway. Wow, and he's attacking Sorin. Now this is what we saw earlier. Yeah, this is what we saw earlier. Joe Panaccio playing a similar Naya aggro deck against Brad Nelson playing the same Drunk Aristocrats deck. The only game that Brad won was solely because Joe Panaccio overestimated Brad's Sorins. He spent a Rampager killing the first one and attacked it the second one for 9 or something like that.
Jeez.
Just like expending these huge amount of resources, killing his 2 Sorins that basically would have gained around 7 theoretical life. When Brad ended the game at like 4, he was very obviously would have been dead to any different play. But Joe really overestimated the power of the Sorin. I think that might be what's happening here. I mean, Brian's at 6. I mean, to kill the Sorin, you have to deal it 4 to finish off its loyalty. For 2 more damage, you can kill the opponent.
Right, but I mean, I think Andrew is kind of figuring out here that he's not going to be able to attack Brian for lethal because the Cartel Aristocrat has protection from the sacrificed Vampire. And, you know, it's going to be able to just basically block the Flint Hoof Boar for free if he wants to just sit on both at Brian. But here, you know, he's able to off the Blood Artist at the expense of getting the Sorin down to 1. And I'm not sure if that's, like, the best play you want to do because you want to just kill your opponent, you know, as quickly as possible. But, I mean, he ultimately got to kill the Blood Artist, basically just trading it for the Absence Pilgrim and 3 damage on the Sorin. But
yeah, but like the -2 from the Sorin isn't what's scary. It's the endless chump blockers that is a lot more threatening from Brian Brundune. And now he gets the flashback Lingering Souls. He's up to a fairly comfortable 8 after the Blood Artist gets the drain for the Vampire last turn, as well as itself and the Absence Pilgrim on the way out.
Yeah, and it looks like a Voice of Resurgence off the top for Brian might actually be able to swing this game. You know, an activation from a Sorin emblem. Maybe play second Sorin and pump all your guys by 2. He's going to be able to sack his Voice of Resurgence after blocks here if he wants to and make a 5/5. You know, lots of interesting things going on Brian's side. Unfortunately, no longer has his Blood Artist because he valued his Sorin a little bit higher than Blood Artist, which is probably correct.
Yeah.
And Andrew, you know, now he's sort of facing down this board full of 1/1s with a Sacrifice Outlet, so his Boris Reckoner is never going to be able to trigger. You know, and should Brian draw a Tragic Slip or some way to interact favorably with the Boris Reckoner, you know, kill it in some way that doesn't deal him damage, you know, it's going to be...
It does seem a bit like it's getting to the point where it's like Thundermaw or bust, you know?
Right.
The game is very quickly slipping out of Jessup's grasp, and now he is fighting with Dominaid, the Reckoner on the Cartel Aristocrat, which, you know, he's going to get the 2 damage from that to be able to shoot something else. The question is whether Brian wants to sacrifice something to get his Cartel Aristocrat protection and save it from the Reckoner's 3 damage. I assume he's got to, right?
Yeah. Something kind of interesting here is... even though the fight ability could resolve normally and, like, you know, trigger the Boris Reckoner, giving it protection from red actually negates the target altogether. And the Boris Reckoner, and the Boris Reckoner doesn't even get to take damage and then, you know, go back to redirecting to something else. So Brian there, heads up play, you know, obviously doesn't want his Cartel Aristocrat to die, but also stifling all of the aggression from Andrew with just a couple of spirits, a Sorin, just a couple of creatures, only 5 or so.
That might have been the saddest Dominaid activation I've ever seen in my life.
-2, kill a vampire.
Yeah. And now it's just going to die immediately to a spirit, presumably. And as we said, Brian Brundune completely taken over this game. I mean, we're a land and a Thundermaw away from victory, but you know, lots of stuff going on here. Like the Vampire on defense, if he has a Tragic Slip or something in hand,
you know, Brian could very easily just take this game if Andrew doesn't have another Thundermaw and a land coming real soon.
Yep, and he's missed a bunch of land drops, and he had an opportunity to play another Thundermaw, so he doesn't have that. So he's got to draw both in these couple turns.
Yeah, I mean, he drew last turn, so if he drew a land this turn and, you know, drew the Thundermaw last turn, then that could spell.
Yeah, he gets to wipe those tokens up, take out the Sorin, and that's a pretty stable position with, you know, a 5/5 in play.
Right. Shaping up to be a very interesting game. You know, Andrew does have a lot of cards he can draw here to punish Brian. You know, Selesnya Charm can give his guy Trample, which is pretty huge if he uses on Boros Reckoner. He has 4 Gorkline Rampager that can do it as well. You know, other than that, though, it just looks like he has a bunch of creatures, you know, some mostly dead Mizium Mortars, and, you know, nothing really all that exciting. He has a couple of cards that can, you know, help him fight through this swarm of tokens from Brian, but
Boros Reckoner attacking the Sorin. Brian Brennan chumps and sacrifices to the Aristocrat so that the Boros Reckoner doesn't get dealt damage, but the Gorkline Rampager is going to end up finishing off the Sorin. And, you know, he could have actually just chosen to get Brian to 1 there.
Yeah.
And actually it values the Sorin higher. We see, again, the power of Sorin in these matchups.
Yeah, that's one thing I see a lot from players is they do overvalue the Planeswalkers on the other side of the table. And even sometimes if they have the ability to get lethal within a turn or two, you know, they decide to just send their entire team at the Planeswalker to get it out of play because, you know, anything can happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it creates this whole sub-game that you can sort of get tunnel-visioned into.
Right.
And now we see, once again, Andrew with a couple cards in hand, but they haven't been doing much, and he doesn't have enough mana for the Thundermaw or the overloaded Mizium Mortars, which would be, you know, another way that he could theoretically get out of this game.
Yeah,
looks like Brian Braun
he's going aggro, baby.
Yeah, he's going to make a big elemental on Jessup's end step here.
Yeah, and one thing you can notice here from Andrew is that he only has access to 1 green mana, and he's a base green deck, which means that he's only been able really to cast 1 spell a turn for the last like 4 or 5 turns, and that's really taking its toll since you know, Brian is able to just play out his entire hand, really gum up the board, and not really give Andrew a lot of options.
Yep, and we see a Blood Artist from Brian Braun with the Cartel Aristocrat already in play.
And crashing in for 7 here, putting Andrew all the way down to 6. That Blood Artist could be game over. If Brian has another spell in hand, like a creature to sacrifice, like if it's a Doom Traveler or a Young Wolf, that just like kills Andrew on the spot. So he's really got to consider chump blocking the Elemental here with the Flint Hoof Boar, because any follow-up creature that can generate multiple copies is going to be game over.
You know, chump blocking as the aggro deck, not exactly where you want to be.
Right.
And this is really the culmination of the last couple turns where the game just was slipping away from Jessup, and now we really see his board presence that he's had all game. I mean, he played that board on turn 2 and that Reckoner on turn 3, and they've been untouched. Yep. But now even that is starting to fall apart, and his presence is fading quickly in this game as he now takes 3 damage after chumping and the Blood Artist trigger.
Yeah. Assuming Brian, you know, remembers his triggers, of course, which is important because a Blood Artist is a card that people very regularly forget. You know, that you remember when your creatures die, but you don't always remember when your opponent's creatures die because, like, you're physically putting your things into the graveyard, so it's much easier to remember.
Yeah, there's
a
mechanism, there's a gating mechanism there to remind you, whereas when your opponent's creatures die, you can often forget.
Yeah. So Brian just sitting on a Sun Petal Grove in hand from what I saw a minute ago. Looks like Andrew still doesn't have land plus Thundermaw Hellkite to take over the game. Here's 3 mana. Looks like another Domri Raid. That's not really going to get the job done.
These Domri Raids have been, like, outright pitiful.
Yeah, I mean, I know he's a little kid, but he usually does a lot more work than this. But here comes sacking to the Cartel Aristocrat, draining for 1 from his ability, all the way down to 9 here.
And Brian Braun for basically the first time of the entire game, is up in the life totals.
Yeah, above 10 for the first time in 10 minutes.
Yep, and, you know, Jessup did have that 5th land, so that, I mean, I gotta say that means he doesn't have Thundermaw. He's got 1 card left.
Yeah.
The Domri Raid.
But with Domri Raid, again, it could be anything.
It could be anything.
Yeah. It looks like Brian drew another land here. He's debating on whether or not he should attack with just the spirits, or even if he should only attack with 1 spirit. I have to feel like he's got to try to get aggressive here.
Yeah, he's lost the Blood Artist. He's got to get his opponent dead. I think this is like attack with both spirits, one at the Diamond Raid, finish it off, one at Jessup.
Yeah, and you know he knows that if he gives Andrew too many looks for a Thundermaw Hellkite, it's just going to put him away really fast.
Exactly. That is a very dangerous threat looming.
Yeah. One interesting note from Brian's deck is that he really doesn't have a whole lot to do with this mana past 4. He tops out at Sorin at the top of his curve. Like, sure, you know, you have things like Feral Scarstriped.
Yeah, that's like the only thing where you can play it and scavenge a bunch of things in the same turn.
Right, and, you know, drawing this many lands, though, pretty devastating. They do play a lot of lands, though, because it's much easier to win a game when you're flooded with this deck, since your cards do get so much incremental value. You know, if you get flooded like Brian is, if he just drew like another spell there,
or if one of those lands was a township.
Yeah, exactly.
If anything had been slightly different, it would have been pretty much over. But now, even though he seems pretty far ahead and has seemed that way for a couple turns, I mean, that Pilgrim represents the 6th mana for potentially overloaded Mizium Mortars, which could bring him back into the game. And as we've been saying all game, at any point, one of the other 3 Thundermaw Hellkites still left in Andrew Jessup's deck could come out right off the top and turn the tides for him.
Yeah, and you know, considering that he played Avacyn's Pilgrim instead of activating the Gavany Township, I think that's a very realistic possibility that his last card is a Mizium Mortars. We haven't really been able to see it. You know, if Andrew does untap here, go Mizium Mortars with Overload, you know, Brian's going to be left with a Cartel Aristocrat with Pro Red, which can basically block Forest Reckoner if it wants to. I'm not even sure that it wants to.
Yeah, and the one spirit.
Yeah, and the one spirit from the Doom Traveler, but can't quite threaten lethal next turn with Cartel plus the 3 potential spirits. But here comes the Overload Mizium Mortars, and now it's time for Brian to think.
To think about how swingy this game has been.
Yeah, no joke. Now, one cool thing that happens with the Elemental token is that since it's an XX, where X is the number of creatures you control, it's going to take 4 damage as a 5/5 creature, which initially doesn't kill it. But since, you know, other creatures do die once the Mizium Mortars resolves, the Elemental shrinks down incrementally as the creatures die, and then, you know,
still has 4 damage.
Still has 4 damage on it. So state-based effects check. It's you know, a 2/2 or a 3/3 with some damage on it, and you know that's what happens here. But Brian giving his Cartel Aristocrat protection from
purple.
Yeah, basically everything. Leaving himself with 3 measly power against a Forest Reckoner and a Voice of Resurgence.
And
go, a pass turn. Bold move, Cotton. Let's see if it works out.
That's definitely interesting. I guess he doesn't have enough mana to first strike the Reckoner, so it would actually a double block would actually kill it.
Yeah, and you know he would be able to deal 5 to Brian though, and only kill the spirit. So I guess that's a reasonable consideration.
Yeah.
All right, Brian, let's get a Varels of Scarstriped up in here and make.
Come on, spell. Come on.
Make that spirit into a monster.
Yeah. And it looks like this is an attack for 1. So
all right, well, he's definitely got a follow up here if he's attacking, because it doesn't look like he's, you know, able to play significant defense. Maybe he has a tragic slip.
I have to say that that's what it would be.
Although,
even then, don't you just... Oh, no, because it doesn't matter because you're slipping the Reckoner.
Yeah.
Presumably. I'm not sure.
I mean, the Township looks pretty dangerous here if he doesn't have anything. Another Voice of Resurgence. Okay, maybe he doesn't have anything because he does. I mean, he obviously doesn't want to trigger the voices.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe he has Tragic Slip and made a small error, or maybe he's just trying to put himself in a position to win the game, which is reasonable. But you know, I guess blocking and sacrificing is not a way you can actually win the game.
Right.
And maybe a top deck Varels of Scarstriped. Maybe you scavenge a little bit. Maybe do a little
get
dance.
Some protection. You know, sneak on through.
And it's interesting to note he has just a Voice of Resurgence and a Doom Traveler to scavenge with until he blocks with a Cartel Aristocrat. So now a Varels off the top will kill Andrew.
Make the
spirit lethal. So this is a really good heads-up play by Brian, trying to figure out exactly how he can win the game since he's so far behind, since he's drawn so many lands. And a Varels off the top could do it, and I think he figured out that was his only actual way to come back from the Mizium Mortars, and he's playing to his outs.
Yep, makes sense.
So Andrew here contemplating activating Township. I suppose he should activate Township, but he might actually wait for damage to resolve. Ooh. You know, I take it all back, Brian. Take it all back.
Well, it still works, right? Because you can put it all on the Aristocrat, give it pro green, stacking the Virals, and attack with the lethal Aristocrat.
Oh, that's
instead.
true. Okay, fair. I take it back again, Brian.
I put it back in. Yeah. And he does have a slip.
Yeah, so he decides here, slipping, giving the 2 tokens. He basically, it's Virals or bust.
Yeah.
You know, the 2 elementals not really going to do a whole lot because Brian knows that he's dead. It's just a last-ditch effort to prevent as much damage as possible.
Could he have taken a line to just, like, do it on his turn on the Reckoner, and then he's facing down, like, just a
But
voice
then he
and a
takes some
Pilgrim?
damage from voice where maybe he doesn't want to take the damage. I don't know.
That seems risky. Well, now he's basically on a 3-outer with about 40 cards left in
he's
his
shaking
deck.
his hands. Let's go!
That is a Godless Shrine.
More like Gutted Shrine.
All right, and we are moving on to game 2. That game was swingy.
Yeah. Whew. I'm out of breath.
I don't know. I have to think that those last couple turns could have gone differently. Also, just Brian Braun could have drawn, you know, a Gambit Township as one of his lands, or a couple more spells, and easily won. Or Andrew Jessup could have, you know, very likely killed Brian Braun straight up if he just attacked him rather than the Sorin.
Yeah.
But yeah, lots of back and forth there, and that's what this Junk Aristocrats deck does. I mean, it's a creature-based control deck. You know, it's got the life gain to get back out of burn range, and the bigger, better creatures, and the not the bigger, better creatures, but the better creature producers. You know.
Yeah. I mean, you know, he can survive combat very easily with all these Doom Travelers, Young Wolves, you know, Voice Resurgences. He doesn't really mind putting his creatures in front of Andrew's to block. Even if Andrew has a Gorkline Rampager, Brian's still going to be left with 1 or 2 creatures in play after that, which, again, he could play something like a Sorin, make an emblem, you know, maybe just play in Flashback and Lingering Souls, and then just still
race.
has an army.
Yeah. So in the sideboard here, Brian Braun has a couple Sin Collectors, a couple Abrupt Decays, some Death Rites, some Unflinching Courages, some Appetite for Brains, and Garrick Relentless.
Yep.
Decay is the obvious one, coming in, you know, kills the Reckoners and the Smiters and what have you. The interesting one from the last match, I was like, Unflinching Courage, theoretically it's for aggressive decks, right? But a deck with Selesny Charms and Mortars and like huge creatures rather than a lot of burn, probably not where you want to be.
You want me to blow your mind right now?
Do it.
Name me one creature he can put an Armadillo Cloak on and get it Celestia Charmed.
You're blowing my mind, man. You're blowing my mind.
Yeah, so almost every creature in Brian's deck actually starts with 2 power or less. And so the Unflinching Courage, while it's not going to be, you know, this huge life swing of like 5 to 7 points per, it's going to keep it around like a 4/4, and you know, like a 4/4 Varl's Scar Striped with lifelink is going to be almost impossible for Andrew to deal with. You know, his sideboard also has Unflinching Courage, which I don't think he wants in this matchup. He has another Celestial Charm, which also doesn't seem that great. He has 3 Boros Charms, not really doing a whole lot since Brian, you know, has like Tragic Slip as his removal spell. 2 Pillar Flames, which could very easily come in to help out against Voice of Resurgence, though Brian does have all these sacrifice outlets to keep it from getting exiled and instead turning it into an elemental. A pair of Blasphemous Acts, which actually seem very good against Brian, should his draw feature way more copies of Lingering Souls as opposed to creatures like Doom Traveler and Voice of Resurgence. Blasphemous Act also a little backfiring sometimes if Brian has multiple Blood Artists in play.
Yeah.
So that could be interesting to watch. The other cards in Andrew's deck, in his sideboard, he has a couple Garrick Primal Hunters, which seem way more designed for beating the control decks, and then the 3 Ground Seals, which obviously do nothing against Brian.
Right. I think that the Pillar Flames are probably going to come in not only for the Voice of Resurgence, but it also takes out the Blood Artists and the High Priests.
And it even kills Young Wolf.
And again, it kills Young Wolf for
Get him
value.
out of here.
And when we were watching a similar matchup earlier with Brad Nelson playing the Aristocrats deck, we actually saw Sin Collector in his deck post-board. What do you think about that choice?
Well, I'll say it again. It's a bold move. I don't think. I mean, you know, we saw the hand reveal, and it was mono creatures and lands from Panaccio, and you know, I think that's basically the norm from these green red decks. They have approximately 4 to 6 spells after board, and Sin Collector's just a 3-mana 2/1. You know, it's not Titleist Color. You can't take their Gore-Clan Rampage out of their hand.
Right. So here we see turn 2 High Priest from Braun Duin on the play, gets immediately Mizium Mortars, which
Mizium murdered.
Yeah, I think the Braun Duin is actually probably fine with. I mean, he didn't have the 1-drop. He doesn't have like the nut, you know, demon draw, turbo demon draw.
Right.
And if the aggro deck is spending their turn 2 killing your guy, you're probably pretty okay with that.
Yeah. You know, Brian obviously wants to start making demons, since that is one of his ways to just take over a game. Andrew not really having a whole lot of access to removal other than Mizium Mortars and the potential Pillars of Flame. So it would have been very likely that Skurzag High Priest could have taken over the game should Andrew not have dealt with it right then. But like you said, he's not playing a Flint Hoof Boar. He's not really putting any pressure on Brian, giving Brian more time to make cards like Lingering Souls, Bullet Artist, those things much better.
Exactly. And here we have a bunch of pretty awesome cards for Braun Duin. His hand looks quite good. He's got a Voice of Resurgence, I think a Blood Artist, and an Orzhov Charm, and another Magic card.
Yeah, and he's going to hold up for Orzhov Charm here as opposed to going for the flashback on Lingering Souls. Still a little mortified, if you will, of the big dragon, you know, taking away his spirits, but you know, it could be that he just wants to make sure that he kills the Boros Reckoner, so that card isn't so problematic over the next few turns.
Boros Reckoner is a card that is really interesting because against all the sacrifice outlets, it's not actually that good. But if you don't have the sacrifice outlets, it's like the best card, especially with Domri Raid, you know.
Oh yeah.
Braun Duin kept foiling it with the Cartel Aristocrat, but had he not had that sacrifice outlet, the Domri Raid Boros Reckoner interaction is just insane.
Yeah, so it looks like he's going to kill it here, take 3 damage down to 13. But, you know, still sitting pretty with a couple Lingering Souls tokens and a Voice of Resurgence. You know, Andrew, again, could just turn on Thundermaw Hellkite in a few turns. It makes the play from Brian of not flashing back that Lingering Souls look a lot better.
But, I mean, look at Brian's life total. You know, after that Orzhov Charm and with any theoretical reach that Jessup could be holding, it's like a scary position, you know. Braun Duin, the deck likes to sort of play on the edge of defeat, you know. It goes really, really low and then sort of gains it back out of burn range.
Right.
The scary part is, you know, at the bottom of that bungee jump, does the cord snap?
Yeah, and as you saw last game, it just broke when he drew 3 or 4 lands off the top, while Andrew sitting pretty with just like 3 or 4 lands in play, just all spells in hand.
Able to keep casting these cards, yeah.
He was able to cast 1 spell a turn, you know, and that's the classic Mana Screw versus Mana Flood. You know, eventually the Mana Screw is going to draw out of it, whereas the Mana Flood, you know, they can only draw 1 card a turn. Whereas if you draw a land from the Mana Screwed side, you're going to start being able to cast 2 spells a turn, or just 1 spell a turn for the rest of the game, which is also better than casting nothing.
Absolutely. So here we see a Blood Artist from Braun Duin, just carefully, quietly, you know, expanding his board, getting Andrew's life total a little lower, getting to the point where he can start to take over and really put on the reach mechanisms that make that deck so powerful. Yeah. But, you know, he's playing quite conservatively, not flashing back Lingering Souls, really playing around this Thundermaw Hellkite or any other similar effect. You know, Voice of Resurgence also pretty awesome with all of the token cards.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting here that something I actually just noticed. They only have about 18 minutes left in this round, and they're only in game 2. And if Brian ends up winning this game, I can't foresee this game ending quickly, just because of, you know, all the things in play. Andrew just has a handful of cards, and, you know, Brian or Andrew both have to win next game in probably under 10 minutes.
Yeah, that is
considering how resilient Brian's deck is at playing defense, it's going to be pretty difficult, really, for Andrew to beat him, and it's actually pretty likely that they end up getting a draw.
Yeah, I mean, Braun Duin, the deck is so technical that not only is it really hard to play, but it's really hard to play against.
Yeah.
Lots of decisions. And then
so
we see
end of turn Tragic Slip on the Rampager. Now a flashback on Lingering Souls after the chump block from Voice of Resurgence. This is going to be a huge attack.
Absolutely, absolutely. The drain from the Blood Artist, from the voice chumping, and from the Rampager dying.
You know, it's a dream
What?
When your opponent casts Thundermaw Hawkeye and instantly dies from Blood Artist.
A second Blood Artist. Braun Duin is painting a beautiful picture for us here. And that elemental is about to go up to 7/7.
I see what you did there, by the way.
Oh, did you notice that?
The beautiful picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And that is an attack for 9.
Yeah, and so even if Andrew has something like Mizzy Mortars or Thundermaw, the Blood Artists are just going to kill him.
Yes. Blood Artist is a hell of a card.
It's pretty real.
And there we go, on to game 3. So much for that.
Yeah, I take it back. The game did end very quickly.
Well,
Voice Resurgence can do that.
You know, your last card being the Tragic Slip,
yeah.
Your opponent letting your Elemental loose, and then drawing another Blood Artist. That ends games, usually.
I can just imagine, you know, like the, I guess the flavor behind the Stag Cry. I just mind blanked. Voice Resurgence. Just, you know, the flavor behind, oh, I'm this little elemental deer, and I'm going to play some defense and jump in front of this giant...
Oh, no, please, sir, don't hurt me.
Please don't hit me with your giant hammer, Luxodon Smiter, no. And then he hits him, his face explodes, and then this giant tree thing pops out of it and just goes animal. All
just
over.
Like slaps the elephant in the head.
Yeah. It's like, meanwhile, you know, Brian kicks a coffin open, and then the Gorkon Rampager sort of trips and falls into it with a tragic
slips
slip.
on a banana peel, falls in.
Mario Kart style.
Yeah.
Some things maybe they don't work so much.
Yeah. Earlier I was trying to tell the difference between Falcon Wrath Aristocrat and Cartel Aristocrat, because Falcon Wrath Aristocrat can sacrifice any creature including itself, while Cartel Aristocrat can only sacrifice another.
Yeah.
You see, because the Cartel Aristocrat's a human, and he's from the
selfish.
Orzhov Guild, so he's all about himself, you know, and he's like got this religious conspiracy thing going on. But the Falcon Wrath Aristocrat is just like a vampire, just all bloodlust, right? She doesn't care. She doesn't
it's
care.
like, you know, I've watched old vampire movies. I've seen a vampire bite into its own arm from time to time.
Yeah.
These things happen. Sometimes you're hungry.
Exactly.
Sometimes there's no noodles accompanying around, or maybe they ran out of the blood flavored noodles. You know.
Right. Well, I mean, but Falcon Wrath Aristocrat, I think having haste and flying, you know, it gets to attack for free pretty much every turn, and it can get indestructible. But I don't know about you, but personally, I've never invited a Falcon Wrath Aristocrat into my house.
No, never.
So how come she gets to deal me 4 damage immediately every time?
I don't know where you're going with this. I'm lost.
That's like vampire lore.
Oh yeah, because you have to open the door.
Yeah, you have to invite the vampire in.
They don't. I don't think that they do that in Innistrad. I think that
look a little different. They're more like Twilight rules. If they're around the sunlight, you're shine. I got you. Yeah.
Dude, I've seen Soren sparkle before.
Oh, that is a shiny one.
Yeah. He was sparkling in game 1 for sure. So we're shuffling up here for game 3. Braun Duin, Mr. BBD with Junk Aristocrats against Andrew Jessup playing Naya Aggro, you can call it. It's more of a mid-range, but it does have Rampager, Flint Hoof Boar. Tops off with Thundermaw Hellkite. Looks like Brian's taking a mulligan here. He is on the draw, though, so it's not going to hurt him as bad.
Right. And it's much more important to have the right mix of cards rather than having a critical mass of cards.
Right.
Like,
you know,
all of your, like, a lot of your cards are more than one card anyway, like Remaining Souls and Voice Resurgence and whatnot, but it's more important to have, like, the removal for the key creatures and the diversified threats, the sacrifice outlet or the resilient creatures, and the mana. You know, you need a little from column A, column B, column C, and if you have, like, all lands or, like, all token guys or whatever, you're better off just looking for another 6.
Yeah, and it's also something to note that it's not a free roll with these 3-color decks to just always have perfect mana.
Oh, absolutely.
And I mulligan all the time with these 3-color, you know, mid-range and aggro decks where, you know, you just have 2 colors and you have a handful of the odd color and you can't actually cast a spell. Either after mulligan or get very lucky and sort of draw out of it. Now, the Farseek decks have a lot easier time with this, things like Jund, or, you know, like a Bant control deck, because they do have access to Farseek, which fixes their mana perfectly, like, every time. But, you know, as you can see from these Junk Aristocrats decks, you know, they sort of just have to rely on raw dogging the right colors at the right time.
Especially with the 2 Gavney Townships, like, a little extra risk. I mean, obviously the reward is worth it. But
Gambo!
Yeah, no gamble, no future, you know?
Yeah. So it looks like Andrew has perfect mana and a turn 2 Voice Resurgence. Brian's got a little bit of nothing, unless he wants to give Andrew an elemental token.
Yeah, I can't imagine that's his plan.
Yeah. All right. A little bit of 5 damage action. You know, BBD might have a lingering souls or something here to help pad his life total, but
looks
honestly,
like he's got a bunch of black cards.
Yeah, it looks like he's just color screwed, and that's, like we said, something that can very easily happen. Andrew, his 3-color deck, drawing, you know, pretty well, not missing a beat.
And just like that, Braun Duin, half of his life total gone, facing down 8 more.
Yep.
There's a black land, but he's got to pay 2 life to get it into play. Is the one spell he gets to cast off it going to be enough to pull him out of this?
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
I don't think so. And, you know, that's really unfortunate for Brian. Like, he's been on the cusp just like this for the last couple terms I've watched him. He ended up getting second, actually, in the Seal Deck tournament, but he lost in, like, the next to last round of the Standard tournament on the same weekend. He's always doing very well at the top tables, and then sometimes the wheels just fall off, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. You know, you could make an argument that he can mulligan to 5, but, I mean, you can't really throw back a hand that's got a removal spell, 2 solid creatures, and lands.
And a couple lands, yeah.
And you just have to try to hope to draw a black source and not be dead.
Yep. Absolutely, I agree.
He's going to go to 8 here. I think he's got an Abrupt Decay, which, if all he has is Orzhov Charm, then he's basically dead.
Yeah.
If he just has a Chum Blocker, I'm pretty sure he's dead too. So
it's basically Decay or Bust.
Looks like he's frowning instead.
Yeah, he is not happy, and it looks like he's reaching for a Blood Artist.
Yeah, if you play, I don't know. This is bad.
I thought that was a Voice of Resurgence, but I actually think that's an Unflinching Courage in his hand.
Maybe. Unfortunately, though, since he has an 8, any creature he plays, he's going to have to Chump Block towards. You know, like, even if it's a Blood Artist, you know, it's not going to kill anything. He gets to gain a life, but he still takes 5. So, just really,
and he's dead if Jessup has literally anything.
It's like, oh, you have a handful of anything?
Yeah. Oh, anything. Oh, it's anything? All right, you got me.
It's like a land for Hellkite or a spell. And, you know, Andrew has to know that Brian has basically nothing up his sleeve.
Oh, Township, that'll do it.
Yeah. No, it's still only 7.
And it is Township. Braun Duin down to 1, facing down a very
these
board.
tokens on these creatures seem egregious because Brian's just going to draw and concede.
That is aggressive.
Yeah. Ooh, Voice Resurgence, dead.
Yeah. Well, that would have been a good one on turn 2.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yep, and there it is.
So, the scoop from Brian.
Frustrating way to lose.
A somber look of disappointment. Maybe tomorrow he'll also go 7-2.
maybe he'll lose playing for top 8 yet again.
Yeah. You know, me and Brian are really good friends. We hang out all the time.
Yeah, he's an awesome guy, and he's a really great player. He has a lot of finishes and a lot of almost finishes.